Friends, so today we'll talk about the situation in Hong Kong, the protests, the reasons for the protests, and of course a comparison with the present situation in Hong Kong with that of India. Hong Kong is administered as a special territory in by China under the name of one country, two systems. Same way the former Portuguese colony of Macau is also administered as a special territory, administrative territory. Hong Kong was a small island. It's originally only on an island, which was annexed by the British after the first Opium War in 1842 under the Treaty of Nanking. The Qing emperors in China allowed Britain the complete control over this island, Hong Kong. Later, after the second Opium War, some territories of the mainland, adjoining territories, Kowloon, was also given to Britain. Then in 1898, a 99-year-old lease was signed to get more areas for Hong Kong, administered under Hong Kong. So that 99-year lease came to an end in 1997. And China demanded the return of not only the leased territories but also the Hong Kong Island and Kowloon. But by this time, Hong Kong has been developed by Britain as the financial capital of Asia. So, very successful capitalist economy functions in Hong Kong. Even right now, it is one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, the most skyscrapers for any city in the world, fourth in the UN HDI index. By all means a very wealthy territory, and it follows the British system of governance. But Britain became very weak by the end of the 20th century, and China under Deng Xiaoping started the economic reforms in 79, and after 2 decades has been emerging as a new power, major power. So the bargaining power of UK was very less in 1997. So they decided to give it up, the whole territory, to China. Anyway, almost all the people of Hong Kong were ethnic Chinese, Han Chinese. So it does not make much of a sense for Britain to hold on to a territory. If not, the mainland China may even take over Hong Kong by force. So instead of that, they negotiated with the Chinese government and signed the agreement and then transferred Hong Kong to China. But for 50 years, it will be governed by a separate law, what is known as the Basic Law of Hong Kong. It will continue to have the same judicial system which follows the common law of England. Its administrative system and political system, economic system will be different that of the mainland China. Though the mainland China will be responsible for its defense and foreign affairs and all that. So it still follows free capitalism. The Hong Kong with its open atmosphere for doing business. It's headquarters of many companies. It has a very thriving business atmosphere, stock market, financial capital and all that. And it also allows free dollar trade also, which is very much restricted in mainland China. So for the growing China, which had a great ambition to become a global power, Hong Kong was the locomotive at that time, because a tiny dot, Hong Kong, the island of Hong Kong, its economy was almost 20% of the China in 1997, but not now anymore. Now Hong Kong is only around 3% of the China's economy. Hong Kong also has a separate passport. Now it has got around 75 lakh people. Out of that, around 3 lakh people are British nationals, and around 35 lakh people, almost half of them, are British overseas nationals. They are not citizens but British overseas nationals. So the remaining are, majority are Han Chinese, and they are Chinese citizens also. But even they cannot travel free into mainland China. So they need special permit, not a separate passport, but need a special permit from the Chinese authorities if they want to travel to mainland China. And the same thing is true for Chinese living in mainland China also. They cannot just like that come to Hong Kong. So China has agreed for 50 years to maintain different political. Similarly, Hong Kong is not ruled by Communist Party directly. Its chief executive, who is appointed by a committee in Beijing, headed by the Chinese Prime Minister, but it is done on the basis of recommendation of a very big electoral college in Hong Kong, 1,200 members, making up of business, industry, and all walks of life in Hong Kong. So, but not is not directly elected, but there are elections being held for a legislature, 70th legislature in Hong Kong, and China also cannot impose any of its laws directly onto Hong Kong. So it has to be done by the Hong Kong legislature. So the political, economic, judicial, administrative systems of Hong Kong is very different from that of mainland China, and this is for 50 years till 2047. Now, of course, the protests have started last year in April 2019. So then the Hong Kong domestic, the chief executive said they will enact a law which will allow for extradition of wanted criminals into mainland China. So the many Hong Kongers just rightly felt that the Hong Kong administration chief executive, who is appointed by Beijing, will extradite many pro-democracy supporters to Beijing to be tried in mainland China, because as I said, the judiciary in Hong Kong is mostly free, and it also works on the basis of English common law, not the Chinese law. So there have been spontaneous protests starting from April 2019, and they continue till December, till the outbreak of the coronavirus. And though the chief executive in Hong Kong agreed to initially to withdraw the bill and later to completely terminate the bill in September, but by the time the protesters did not believe, they were egged on by the Western media. Though the politicians both in US and Europe were not very careful in not directly criticizing the Chinese president or the administration. So the fear among the present youth is that 2047 is not very far away. Only from 1997 to 47 50-year agreement, almost half is over. So they feel that slowly not only the autonomy is being eroded, but they don't want Hong Kong to become part of the communist China after 2047. They are worried about their own self. People who are in the 20s will be still in their 50s when Hong Kong will be officially part of communist China. There won't be any more one country, two systems. So they are worried about the future of themselves and their children. So they want to enjoy the freedom, what they enjoy. They also want their children and grandchildren to enjoy. So that is where the fear about the future was the reason for the spontaneous protests. But of course, the protests slowly were fizzling out, and they were also protesting against the police brutalities. They wanted direct election to chief executive, and they want all the protesters to be released without any charges and all those. There is a 5-point demand is also there for them, and they say it is non-negotiable and all that. And of course, after a lull, of course, the Chinese government has not learnt from the regime in India, which has used the coronavirus pandemic as an excuse to arrest all the activists, peaceful protesters and activists who have never supported violence, including Pinjra Toad, women activists, even people who are so much caring about a pregnant elephant which died by accident in Kerala, are not bothered about pregnant women for more than 3 months held in jail without bail. The courts being mute spectator. Student activists have been arrested under draconian acts like Sedition Act and Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and again, as I said, without any proper bail also. And third-degree methods have been used on peaceful protesters. Unlike this, the Chinese government was not brilliant enough to arrest the important pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. So after China has controlled the epidemic, protests have started in May again. Now their demands are very much different. Now they want complete independence. In fact, couple of 2-3 days back, They held the anniversary candle vigil meeting of 1989 Tiananmen Square protest. Tiananmen was really a tragedy. As a teenager, I still remember that. Of course, that time there was only Doordarshan, there was no other media, and you had to rely only upon newspapers and magazines to understand what is China. But the Tiananmen, hundreds of protesters, probably thousands, were killed when China students, but most of them when tanks were rolled in to control them and all that. But now the demand is being more stringent. If they want outright independence, which of course China will never give, they are making it more difficult for themselves, because many people support more autonomy and China not to interfere with the administration of Hong Kong, but not majority of the people won't support independence. So the present protests are due to now China last month conducted its annual National People's Congress. That is the name of the parliament. One party rule. Parliament, which to rubber stamp whatever the Politburo says, the NPC will do that. That annual session was being held in Beijing. In that, they decided to bypass the basic law in Hong Kong, as the agreement between UK and this thing as in China states that the Hong Kong will be administered through basic law. And Article 23 of the basic law clearly states that Hong Kong legislature will enact laws for the security of Hong Kong. But now China has decided to bypass this Article 23 and decided to take control of the national security. See the word security. This on the same use of such meaningless words like security, people are harassed. Whether it is in India or in China, it remains the same. So national security, under which they are trying to, things are not very clear, because still now the national security law is not yet passed by the NPC in Beijing. So it is expected that many of the laws which are now implementable in mainland China will be made applicable to Hong Kong, and the national security agencies in China, the police, the secret service, all will be able to operate in Hong Kong freely, and therefore they can monitor the Hong Kong residents. So whatever the rights they enjoy, like internet and all, in mainland China, many things are, they have their own version of Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp and all that. But Hong Kong residents enjoy what others do. So all this now, fearing that already many Hong Kong people are deleting whatever they face, the social media posts in Facebook and all that, fearing that national security law once passed by Beijing, it will be used to harass them, arrest them and monitor them and all those things, etc. So Hong Kong will become another Xinjiang. That is the fear of the protesters right now. The response of the Western world, which is supposed to uphold the liberties and the freedoms, etc., is very mixed. Trump, of course, his usual blustering mood, has threatened many things which he cannot implement. Many of the stuff he said, he will reduce the number of Chinese students in US. Chinese are the biggest number of students, more than twice the next number, that is Indians. So it's a huge source of income for the American universities. And he says he will remove the special status given to Hong Kong by US, under which a lot of trading things are there. So that will hurt Hong Kong citizens more. Already because of the protests, even before the coronavirus pandemic broke out, in the first, second and third quarters, Hong Kong economy has actually shrunk. And the inequalities which are already always there in Hong Kong have increased. Hong Kong allows now 90-day visa-less travels to US citizens. In retaliation, China may revoke that also. So that will reduce the importance of Hong Kong as a financial center, as a business center. Already China in the last 20 years have taken many steps to reduce the importance of Hong Kong. Now Shanghai stock market is bigger than that of Hong Kong, the biggest in Asia. And Hong Kong, and now of course, IMF have accepted Chinese renminbi as a global currency which can be traded also. So they are not dependent upon that much like Hong Kong previously. And China is also viewing companies to shift their headquarters away from Hong Kong to either to Shenzhen, which is relatively next door in the Pearl Delta in the Guangzhou province. And also R2 in China has also developed just south of Hong Kong in the huge island of Hainan. They have developed a huge special economic zone. So they are encouraging people to shift there. And Trump, of course, already China has decided to go slow in deciding to implement the first phase of the trade agreement they have signed in January, under which they have agreed to import more Chinese agricultural products, particularly beef. And already they have decided last week to decide to go slow. That will hurt Trump electorally because beef is grown mostly by the white farmers in the Midwestern states. And some of the states which has traditionally been Republican or he carried very comfortably in 2000, the last elections in 2016, like Iowa, like Ohio, like Arizona, even Wisconsin, are now up for grabs. Either Trump is trailing or the odds are even right now as per the opinion polls with Joe Biden. So it will hurt his electoral chances more. But you will continue. But Trump, for all his macho image and all his bluster in the media and all, is a coward, outright coward. And most of the fascists are cowards, including Miss Mussolini, Hitler, and the present day fascists also. They are real cowards. So he has not never mentioned Xi Jinping in any of his criticism. Whenever he criticizes China, is always generic word China. Never. He always says Xi Jinping is my good friend, he's a nice buddy and all that. He also tells Modi is my buddy and all those things, etc. He never. So I don't think he can do anything more. The Europe is very mixed, because they know China is rising, they can't control it, and China is their biggest trading partner. They don't want to unnecessarily antagonize China over a trivial issue. Even UK, which is directly involved in Hong Kong as being the previous ruler in 97, which has a moral responsibility, only says that it will enact law which will allow this, as I said, around 3.5 million people are British overseas nationals. They are not citizens. So it will enact a law which will allow them to come to England and become citizens, and for them to stay in England without a visa initially for 1 year and later become citizens. Only that much can be done, because as China has grown so much right now, and China, Hong Kong is a vital thing. It's like Tibet or Xinjiang, the core issue, which they will never compromise. It's not like some trading issue which the give and takes are possible. This is not possible. China, in response to the growing unrest, want to stamp its thing. The protesters, the threat to the protesters, the threat to the freedoms in Hong Kong are for real, knowing the way the totalitarian regime in China operates. But there is very little the protesters themselves can do, or their supporters elsewhere. The media, of course, is fully supporting them. When you see CNN, when you see BBC, even when you see Al Jazeera, they are all supporting the protesters and the right for freedoms and the democracy, whatever little democracy which is there in Hong Kong. But beyond that, the whole world is busy with COVID-19. Europe is just coming out of that. They are relaxing, and now the priority for them is to how to restart the economy. The same thing, US is still having 22-25,000 people are daily coming out, though the death rate, fatality rate has come down, that due to the experience of the doctors in treating that. But still 22-25,000 people are daily newly infected with the virus, and the priority is again to get started their economy, and they are also mired in their own domestic political issue, particularly the upcoming November presidential elections. So there is very little the world can right now do. The China has chosen the right time from their point of view, from their perspective, to come up with this new national law. So they will think like the Western media and the Western world is like a dog which will continue barking, but it doesn't have the power to bite in front of the huge dinosaur that is China, the dragon. That's probably the more appropriate word for China. So the same thing, the words what is used by Hong Kong, the media in China to describe the Hong Kong protesters, that they are thugs, that they are terrorists. The same word has been used by Mr. Trump while addressing the media last week in relation with the anti-racist protests in US. The same word he has used, thugs, low people, and he has also threatened to ban Antifa, calling it as a terrorist organization. And the same thing is happening in India. But in India, even the media is not even has a guts, has a spine to criticize all the things which has been done in the name of security. We don't enjoy even rights of the Hong Kong under the basic law. Hong Kong people enjoy the rights of freedom and right of assembly. The same thing is guaranteed to us also under Article 19 of our great constitution. But even peaceful protests are not allowed in India, and peaceful protesters are arrested under the draconian law. Somebody posted the way UP government is handling the migrant labor crisis in social media. That person has been arrested on hurting the religious sentiments of people of one community. And the courts, including the Supreme Court, remaining a mute spectator and even hand in gloves with the regime. I won't even say that India enjoys freedom as enjoyed by people of Hong Kong, which is a semi-autonomous region, not an independent country. Instead of going upward towards the Nordic countries or the Western European countries in terms of enjoying the freedoms, we are now moving towards China or Saudi Arabia, going down very fast. The same reason why the Western countries are not ready to take on China directly, because of the financial power and the economic power of China. And the same thing is true why they are not criticizing all the atrocities committed in India to suppress freedom of expression, because of the economy, because they want the huge market of India. In China, it's different, because China is a factory of the world. It exports more than it imports. In India, it is exactly opposite. India imports much more than it exports, and most of the things what is produced in India is also manufactured by the foreign companies. Even non-essential things like Pepsi, Coke, or what we order, pizzas and burgers, are all Western companies. They even supply our own water to us in mineral water bottles. Many of the companies, popular things, are owned by the Western companies. And so they want the Indian huge markets of India, the 1.3 billion people, a huge market. So they don't really bother about the human rights situation. They just only bark. They won't bite. The regimes in both in China and in India and throughout the Gulf also, the despotic regimes, the monarchies of Gulf region also know that. So the Western media keeps barking, but it has and at present the people are bothered more about their own survival in the West rather than bothering about spreading of such rights in other parts of the world. And the governments themselves are not really bothered. They never bothered really. They just play. So that's unfortunately the situation in Hong Kong. The protesters there are fighting a losing battle against the might of the dragon, and China is slowly coming out of the self-imposed cocoon. At long back, Mao said, when China became independent, hide your strengths till you are ready. And that's what right now is being done right now. Sorry, it was told by Deng Xiaoping, not by Mao. So China, after more than 4 decades of economic reform, is the factory with the highest forex reserves, more than $3 trillion reserves, more than $1 trillion even American debts, American papers they have issued by Fed Reserves. So they are becoming a world's biggest military power also. So they know that the time has come for them to show their real face. They don't have to be afraid of anybody in the world. So that's the reason they are becoming more and more aggressive. And the Hong Kong protests are not helping themselves by asking for outright independence, rather than negotiating with the Hong Kong government appointed chief executive, who seems to be a very somewhat more saner lady. It's better to negotiate rather than making impossible demand. That's one of the reasons how Gandhi's tactics with the British Empire, because you can't fight the mighty empire with meager resources, both financial and human. And the capability of people also to suffer the brutality of the state when it is unleashed on unsuspecting population is very limited. So you have to keep your demands to a manageable level. You can't make impossible demands which cannot be met, and therefore the negotiations will fail anyway. That probably the Hong Kong protests are not learning right now. Anyway, I'll come back with maybe a video on India-China border problems right now happening in Ladakh maybe tomorrow.